Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of WTF Walk the Floors. I'm Stephanie Leger with First Rate Hospitality, and I'm here with my co host, Michele Kline with Kline Hospitality. How are you today, Michele?
I'm doing great. How are you, Stephanie?
Very well. So, what are we going to talk about today?
So, we're going to talk about the executive team, and we'll touch upon some very interesting questions that we felt it made sense for us to address for anyone who's trying to learn what that looks like and how do you get there and all those beautiful things. So, Stephanie, what do you think encompasses that executive team if we were to think about it on a property level? So
Mhm.
let's say we're talking to our emerging leaders right now.
Absolutely. And I think, first off, is having that experience of knowing what your team is having to go through on a day-to-day basis. And what I mean by that is, say you are the executive member for food and beverage. So you understand what encompasses from the server all the way to also too on the line cook, because in the back of the house in culinary, they are also too having to make the food and making sure that food's getting out at the time that it needs to be out. And then also too, what the server or even the back server, what they're having to go through with the guests and facing them directly, and knowing also too all of their different needs that the guests may have. But yeah, I would say first off, of creating an executive is having that experience in all the areas of what their division is.
Yes, absolutely. And what's interesting is when you have a director, vice president, general manager, whatever the case may be, depending on the size of the property, right? That has a very specific background or very heavy background in one particular area. For example, you
Mhm.
have a general manager who has a very heavy background in finance, or you have an assistant GM who has a very specific or very heavy background in food and beverage. Do you think it? Do you think that their background plays a role in how how the rest of the team is going to be structured?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also too of longevity of how long they've been in that property. Have they moved around to different cities and moving their way up the ladder, or now have they been at that property for 10, 15 years and they've pretty much now have just moved internally at the one property. And yes, getting back to your point too of, if they've only been in one area of the hotel, it really I would say those executive meetings, which we've been in, really influence of what we're mostly talking about. Like you said, if they were come from finance, well, we're always going to be talking about the numbers compared to someone that's with the operations, talking more about the guest experience.
Absolutely. So the view, the perspective, the need for specific information sometimes tends to fall in those categories. Now, I also think that it's important to note that there are many instances where, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I think it's more strategic. There are
Mhm.
many times where, for example, if your general manager has a very heavy background in housekeeping, and you have somewhat of a weak team in food and beverage, or you have a new restaurant coming in and your director doesn't have a lot of experience, but you're looking for an assistant general manager, more than likely, chances are that you're going to be seeking an assistant general manager who has a heavy background in food and beverage, right? So
Mhm.
that now you have an exec team that can actually compensate each other and bring more of that value to the table and that perspective to the table, as opposed to bringing, the GM and the AGM that both have housekeeping experience, or whatever that looks like. I think that plays a very big role in the decision making, or the strategy behind creating that team and elevating the rest of the property, of course.
Absolutely. And also too, vice versa is knowing that, okay, I, may have that new housekeeping person coming on. So there's a lot of transition, but I already know that food and beverage, they already have their strong executive there. So I can be able to, as a GM or an executive in rooms, of making sure, okay, let me focus on my new leaders that are coming in and that they're onboarding and their transition with even the employees is going smoothly, and knowing that, okay, I can just, touch base with food and beverage. I, don't need to spread myself thin of now trying to overseeing all areas of the property 24.
Yeah. And you and I talk about walking the floors, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's in our title, right? But it's so critical. It is so critical, and it's not just critical for the exec team. Again, you have someone with a very heavy housekeeping background. That person should be immersed in food and beverage, in any other departments that you may have on property that are not your place or your
Mm,
background, right? If you're on a gaming property, get involved with gaming. Understand how their world looks like, how they live day after day, what the struggles are, what are the areas of opportunity. And also walking the floors for those emerging leaders. There's nothing better that one professional who has an array of experience get really, really good at one thing, but know about everything. I think that
absolutely.
it's critical to taking on that next step, where now you have a comprehension of what everything around you looks like. And you're able to, even if maybe you're not an expert in that specific field, you're able to speak to it, ask the right questions, and then start learning that new segment.
Yes. I mean, I even remember, I was 17 when I started in the hotel industry, and watching the executives walk around our property and being like, wow, this is, they're so knowing of everything, and the way that they hold themselves and the way that they guide their team members. And then it was, about, geez, 10 years ago, that when I started now being at the corporate and executive and visiting properties, and then they were like, oh, it's Stephanie from corporates here, and I was like, wow, like now I but at the same time, I'm like, no, I'm just Stephanie. I'm here with you. I want to making sure that we're helping you and learning and training and all of that. So yeah, it's definitely, seeing from being the little guppy to, now moving up to the top of the the food chain, I guess you could say. It's been really interesting. And then also too, of hearing it from your fellow colleagues and other employees as well, that you're just like, no, I'm here, to do my job just like everyone else, but then seeing the respect that the employees have for the executives too. And it could go vice versa as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And how important it is to not lose that,
Yeah.
regardless of what your position or your title is, not losing that. Continue to walk the floors, continue to inspire people, continue to get your hands dirty,
Yes.
jacket off, right? I think that a lot of our male execs in our industry have noticed in the last few years, and I want to say, sure, COVID has made us kind of like advanced that need for breaking those chains a little bit when it comes to being so formally dressed, especially in our industry. But even before COVID, like, you see male executives that would wear a tie all the time, and sure,
Hmm.
they haven't lost the jacket, which is a great thing, but you can't do much with a tie in the middle of the way. So those things are important. I think they speak very loudly about people, making sure that you still take your jacket off, pull your sleeves up, and get on your hands and knees if you have to with your own people, because that creates that respect that you're referring to.
Absolutely. And then also too, now seeing around the executive table is the different generations as well. So now we have younger generations that are becoming executives before they're even 25. And then you have more senior executives, and then even going to what they're wearing as well. As some properties where the executives, yes, they will wear, jeans and a jacket and a polo. And then you still have very traditional executives that will go and wearing the suit and tie.
Yes, I do believe, and if I can leave everyone with one nugget, is that you have to be very careful not to grow too fast. So
Yeah.
when you mention having 25-year-olds at in the boardroom, I think it's great because it brings great perspective. It brings that perspective that perhaps we don't have, um, and we need, because our guest is changing, right? But I also think that, if you are an emerging leader, if you are a young adult below 25 perhaps, get as much experience as you can, experience as much as you
Mhm.
can before you jump onto that executive role, so that you don't burn your name. I think it's
Mhm.
extremely important to pace yourself and do it right. And I grew very fast in my career, but I also knew where my place was, right? And I always stayed humble, because it was important for me to not speak out of whatever I heard, but speak out of knowledge, from a place of knowledge. I think that adds way more value from a credibility standpoint. So, if there is one tip or nugget that I can leave our younger audience with today, is take your time to get that knowledge, to walk the floor, to pair up or team up with those people that you want to learn from. And don't be so concerned about growing too fast, because what's really going to allow you to take that next step is that experience that you carry with you.
Absolutely. And sometimes, it's the executive team that needs to huddle around who that new emerging leader is also too, because now when you're not, and now they're getting burnt out, you're pretty much setting them up for failure, and then they're going to be known in the industry as, oh, they can't handle it. But really it was because they didn't have the proper guidance that you and I, were fortunate to be able to receive.
Great point. Great point.
So let's talk about also to for our emerging leaders, of not going up the ladder too fast. But what would you say, Michelle, of the steps to being able to achieve that goal of being at the executive level?
I think that is extremely important to do two things. On the one hand, educate yourself, whether it is going to university, it is going to a private school, it is taking that course, certifying yourself. Read, read. You don't have time to read, get audible, an audiobook, right?
Mhm.
So there are many ways and many avenues that will align with your budget and with your schedule, that still allow you to grow from the theoretical standpoint. And then from the practical standpoint, walk the floor. Walk
Mhm.
the floor, observe, ask questions, ask questions. Something that helped me grow fast in my career and move around in different positions and roles was the fact that I would enroll in absolutely everything. I was part of
Mhm.
the safety committee. I was part of the green committee. I was part of the events committee. I was any committee you can think of at my properties, regardless of the region, I was part of, because that gave me massive exposure. If you're not able to go to openings, if you're not able to travel to different markets. So before you're able to start traveling and getting to see and gaining that exposure outside of your own property, sign up and raise your hand for anything
Mhm.
and everything that you possibly can. Any opportunity that's there, take it.
Absolutely.
What
And
about you?
I would have to add on too, I think it was one of our first episodes that we were talking about never burn a bridge. Our
Mm.
industry is still so small
So
that
small, even internationally, so small.
you never know that when you were say a front desk manager and now you see a director of rooms position is available and HR sees your resume and sees that you're at a property that one of the executives were at the same time and then goes and says, "Oh, look at so and so has applied for the director of rooms. They're working with you at the same time. What do you have to say about them?" And then you want to making sure that there's positive feedback that's coming and not saying, "Oh, it's a disaster, not a team player, doesn't walk the floors." So never burn a bridge because you
Never
never
burn a bridge.
know
Yes.
who who is at that property or who that person knows from a different property that came from the other property. I mean, look at us, we have been together in a past life before working together and then working now on other projects together, so good thing that we got along. But yes, definitely never burn a bridge while you're going up to achieving that executive level. And then the other thing I would have to add on too is that, there's going to be some tough choices along your journey of achieving that executive level. You may be at a property that the executives, tend to stay there for a long time. They have kids that are in the school system, or they're just in an area that not many people come and go, and then now you're kind of plateaued because you're basically waiting for them to retire, which isn't going to be happening anytime soon. So being able to, make those decisions of, okay, is it right for me to leave and then maybe come back, because you never know what could happen, but then making sure that you're not hurting yourself from not achieving higher success. And
Yes.
then also, it's but then also too of, you know having those exposures. Like for me, I remember being very young as saying, okay, I want to making sure I have housekeeping experience. I want to do it now, get it done out of the way. Who would have thought that I fell in love with it and I stayed with it for a while? But making sure of, hopping around while you're young and you can be able to work those different schedules.
Absolutely. The magical jungle gym, right? If you know that whoever it is that is above you is not going anywhere and you are not in a position where you could explore opportunities elsewhere for whatever reason, you want to stay there, whatever that case may be, there is always a way for you to stay relevant. You have to stay
Mhm.
relevant. Not having that exposure and idling for 5 years of your career is should never be an option if in your path is the choice of perhaps or the dream of perhaps becoming an executive for sure.
Yeah, and even adding on to brand loyalty, I was so thought I had to be so loyal to the brand, and then I jumped ship to get a different experience, and it's created more of a well-rounded background that I have. But I know those are tough decisions, as well as leaving a brand to go to another brand and all of the uncertainty as well.
Absolutely. And always remember that before you do that, consider that your brand may have opportunities at sister properties. There is
Mhm.
always an option. There's always an option for you to explore other departments, and there's always an option for you to explore within the brand other areas of opportunity. So keep that in mind. All right,
Yes.
Stephanie, this was great. Thank you so
Yes,
much for being
absolutely.
here. This was fun, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.